It's okay, you can clap. Hi, welcome to the Mona Sherman Memorial Lecture for 2025. I'm Carol Allman Morton, the Executive Director at Ollie at Berkshire Community College. We are so delighted to have you all here today. And I want to particularly thank the Sherman family. I can't see you because of the light, but I'm pretty sure you're right over here, for your support and philanthropy that makes this event possible. Thank you. And thank you as well to Berkshire Gas for your ongoing support of this event. Thank you to them. And I'm going to keep this short and sweet. And now welcome the president of Berkshire Community College, Ellen Kennedy, our biggest supporter. Thank you, Ellen.
Good evening. It's so great to have all of you here with us this evening. Welcome to the 17th annual Mona Sherman Memorial Lecture. Mona Sherman played a transformative role in the growth and expansion of Ollie at Berkshire Community College. This lecture series, established through the generosity of her family and friends, honors both her love of the Berkshires community and of lifelong learning. Ollie at Berkshire Community College is growing and strong. Ollie is expanding programming with more interdisciplinary opportunities, active learning classes and workshops, and continues to offer wonderful courses and free and open to the public lectures just like this one. We are excited for an upcoming summer classes in person and online, and if you haven't had a chance to sign up, there's still time and there's still a little bit of room, so take care of that right away. Now is the time that I would normally be introducing and welcoming Lisa Sharkey, who is Mona's daughter, to the stage so she would introduce our speaker. Unfortunately, Lisa wasn't able to join us tonight, but she will be here in spirit, and she has designated Paul and Casey to be with us tonight, and they're out here somewhere. So we're so happy to have them. We send our heartfelt thanks to Lisa for her years of hard work in recruiting speakers and her passion and care for this particular event. Thank you to Art Sherman and Mona's family for your ongoing support and partnership for this program. And if any of you would like to help support this program or anything else Ollie related, we would love to talk to you. So find me after the event or during it even. Thank you as well for to the amazing Mahaiwe staff and also your volunteers for the hospitality and support you always provide us, from lighting and tech to ticketing and seating. And thank you also to the bookstore staff for selling books before and after the talk today in the lobby. Picked up mine, and they now take credit cards, so you can do it very easily. Tonight's lecturer, Chris Whipple, is an acclaimed author, political commentator, documentary filmmaker, and speaker. He is the author of the new best-selling book, Uncharted. I'm channeling Lisa right now. Uncharted: How Trump Beat Biden, Harris, and the Odds in the Wildest Campaign in History. His previous book, The Spy Masters: How the CIA Directors Shape History and the Future, was published by Scribner in 2020 and received rave reviews. A frequent guest on MSNBC and CNN, Chris has written for the New York Times, Washington Post, Vanity Fair, Politico, and the Daily Beast, and many other publications. He is the Chief Executive Officer of CC Whip Productions and executive producer of the Showtime film The Spy Masters: CIA in the Crosshairs. Chris was educated nearby at Deerfield Academy and received a Bachelor of Arts degree with honors in history from Yale. He lives in Essex, Connecticut with his wife, Carrie. And now, without further ado, Chris Whipple.
Wow. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, President Kennedy. I've always wanted to say that. I'm really thrilled to be giving this talk honoring Mona Sherman. She was an extraordinary woman, and it's clear the apple didn't fall far from the tree, because her daughter, Lisa Sharkey, my friend and boss at HarperCollins, is a force of nature. Are you sure all of you aren't here to see Steve Earle? When I saw my name on the marquee with Steve Earle, I was reminded of maybe the biggest thrill I had as an author before this, which was at the Tucson Book Festival last year. I was on a stage with Major Garrett of CBS News and Tim Miller of The Bulwark, and there were a couple of thousand people in the audience, and we were pretty impressed with ourselves. until we realized that the next speaker was Linda Ronstadt. But I turned to Major and I said, well, opening for Linda Ronstadt is not half bad. Have the last 120 days felt like a decade to everybody here? Nothing like a slow news week to get, I don't know what we'll talk about here, but I watched the talk that Ari Melber gave here. It was just a year ago, but it feels like a galaxy far, far away. Donald Trump was on trial in New York City. And believe it or not, Joe Biden and Donald Trump had just agreed to meet in a summer debate. What could possibly go wrong? Well, we all know how that turned out. Last summer, I was writing another book, a history of presidential campaign managers from 1968 to the present. When Biden stepped aside and the bottom fell out of the political universe, I called Lisa and I said, look, this is the political story of the century. I think we've got to push this book aside and do it. And she readily agreed through her team at HarperCollins behind me, and off we went on a wild ride. It was not only a wild campaign, as we all know, having lived through it, but a wild publishing ride as well. Like Kamala Harris, we had a little more than 107 days to do it. We even had to design 2 different covers, one with Kamala Harris victorious, and then, of course, the one we ended up with Mr. Trump ascendant. But as wild as the campaign was, it was wilder behind closed doors. More on that in a minute, but first I can see this is a pretty young audience. But some of you may be old enough to appreciate a quick story about how I got into the business of writing these books. When I left ABC News in 2011, my first project was a documentary film on the White House chiefs of staff, which eventually led me to write a book called The Gatekeepers. But in the beginning, there was a problem. How do you track these guys down? For example, how do you find a home address for Dick Cheney? Well, my wife, Carrie, went online, and a few hours later, she came back and she said, I've got it. And I said, got what? She said, Dick Cheney's home address. I said, where'd you get it? And she said, warcriminals.org. That was our first big research breakthrough. I'm not going to speak long tonight because I really want to get to the question and answer part of this, always my favorite. Lawrence O'Donnell and I did this a few nights ago in New York City, and he said, you know, it's so much better than trying to guess what the audience wants to know, and he's right. So, but first, some thoughts about the 2024 campaign. It begins, of course, with Joe Biden. His story is truly Shakespearean, an overused word, but in this case, the right one. And of course, the recent news of his diagnosis with prostate cancer makes it even all the more tragic. At the heart of my book, Uncharted, is a mystery. Almost everyone knew that Joe Biden was too old to run for president for re-election in 2024. So why didn't Joe Biden know it? Why didn't he step aside a year or two earlier and give others more time to compete for the nomination? Why didn't he keep his promise to be a bridge, quote unquote, to the next generation? And was it a cover-up? Did Biden's aides lie to everyone about his mental decline? That's what the authors of another book say. You might have heard about that one. According to this theory, everyone in the administration knew that the president was non-compos mentis and lied about it to the American people. According to some, the press, the Washington Press Corps, was complicit in this conspiracy. My view is a little different. The truth is, this wasn't a cover-up, not in the Watergate sense of the word. In fact, the story is stranger and more compelling than that, and in the end, more human, because the truth is that Biden and his inner circle were lost in a fog of denial and delusion. Even as they watched that disastrous debate on June 27, they believed what they wanted to believe instead of their lying eyes. Let me be clear, I'm not saying that this was benign in any way. In fact, Biden's 11th hour abdication left Kamala Harris too short a runway to compete effectively against Trump. It was a political scandal of historic proportions, and it ended in tragedy for Biden, for the Democratic Party, and arguably for the country. It was a failure of leadership, starting with Biden and his inner circle, but extending to the entire Democratic Party. Imagine what Joe Biden's legacy might have been. He could have been seen as a transformative president. After all, he pulled the country out of an economic freefall, managed a once-in-a-century pandemic, passed more bipartisan legislation than anyone since LBJ, created 17 million jobs, and rallied NATO to face down Vladimir Putin in Ukraine. Not bad. But because of the way he left the stage, Biden will be remembered for enabling the return of Donald Trump. It was a hubris, a stubborn unwillingness to step away from power. That's the tragedy of Joe Biden. As it unfolded, there were a few voices of sanity. One of my sources, Bill Daley, son of the legendary Chicago mayor, was aghast. At the White House on St. Patrick's Day weekend 2024, he noted that Biden needed a teleprompter to talk to a few Irish guys. Daley kept telling his White House friends, how can they let this blanking thing go on? Stunningly, no one ever sat Joe Biden down, looked him in the eye, and said, Mr. President, are you sure you're up to this? How do I know that? I know it because during a visit to the White House, Daley ran into his old friend Tom Donilon, a former national security advisor for Barack Obama. He's the brother of Mike Donilon, Joe Biden's closest political advisor and alter ego. Tom Donilon told Daley that not even his brother had spoken to the president about his age. And if Mike Donilon never had that conversation with Joe Biden, you can be sure that no one did. So why do I say this was not a cover-up in the Watergate sense of the word? First, if Biden's aides knew he was non-compos mentis, why did they push for an early debate in June of 2024? They could have kept him under wraps until the fall, thereby running out the clock. By then, it would have been too late to replace Biden as the nominee. Instead, they sent him into the breach with Donald Trump, a political street brawler. Why? I believe it's because they hoped that a different Joe Biden would show up, the guy who gave the 2024 State of the Union address when he was heckled by MAGA politicians, but outwitted them in a bravura performance, and off the teleprompter, by the way. The truth is that Joe Biden was no Woodrow Wilson. Wilson, of course, was famously incapacitated by a severe stroke, and Edith, his second wife, made decisions for him. By contrast, Joe Biden, more often than not, was governing competently behind closed doors. For those who say Biden was incapable of making decisions, there are some inconvenient facts. Just to cite a few, on the morning of his abdication, so-called, July 21, 2024, the president was on the phone parsing the details of a complex multi-nation prisoner swap. It was brought off without a hitch. I spoke with someone who is not a Biden loyalist, who was with him all the time, on Air Force One, Marine One, in the Situation Room, on calls with foreign leaders. He told me about a call Biden made to Bibi Netanyahu after October 7th. Quote, I'm convinced, unquote, he said, that he saved us from a wider Middle East war, not just because he was so forceful, but also because he rallied all the other leaders to make the case, end quote. It was, he said, a masterful performance. And again, this was not a Biden loyalist. The authors of that other book I mentioned say that unnamed cabinet secretaries thought Biden couldn't be trusted to handle a crisis at 2 a.m. But I spoke to someone who woke the president up multiple times in the middle of the night during the final year, who said that he was fine. So how to reconcile these two Joe Bidens? The one on the phone outwitting Bibi Netanyahu, and the other lost and bewildered on a stage with Donald Trump. Well, there are two parts to being president, the cognitive and the performative. And when it came to the performative part, Biden was hopelessly compromised. That's why in the 2020 race, he campaigned mostly from his basement. There's a scene in Uncharted where a Democratic operative is interviewed for a job in Biden's 2024 campaign. During a meeting with Biden and his aides in the Oval Office, the conversation takes an unexpectedly candid turn. When an aide said to her, "You know, in 2020 we had COVID as an excuse to keep him in the basement. What do we do now?" What they did, as the 2024 race approached, was draw the curtain ever tighter, hiding Biden from the outside world. But of course, there was no hiding him on the evening of June 27th, when he shuffled onto the stage at CNN to face Donald Trump. 12 minutes in, Biden froze and in response to an unrelated question said, as you all remember, I'm sure, we finally beat Medicare. At that moment, almost any objective observer knew that Biden's campaign was finished. Chris LaCivita, co-chair of Trump's campaign, was watching from another room. He turned to his colleague, Susie Wiles, and pollster Tony Fabrizio and said, "That's it, he's gone." Everyone knew it was lights out, game over. Everyone except Joe Biden's inner circle. The depth of their delusion was almost unbelievable. During the debate, Anita Dunn, a senior aide, was watching a so-called dial group, a focus group of voters who turned dials up and down to register their reaction in real time. During Biden's implosion, the dials were pointed at the floor. But as the night went on, the group also didn't like it when Trump made his usual outrageous claims. So Dunn decided that Biden had won the debate. It was crazy, delusional. Ron Klain, Joe Biden's former White House chief of staff, was in charge of Biden's debate prep at Camp David. He painted a devastating picture to me of an out-of-touch president, obsessed with foreign leaders, unable to articulate his second-term plans. And yet, even after Biden's disastrous debate, Klain waged an 11th-hour campaign behind closed doors to keep Joe Biden on the ticket. How to explain this? Well, there's something about breathing the rarefied air of the West Wing that clouds the vision of otherwise savvy political operatives. Bill Daley told me, you're in the bubble. You've crossed the Rubicon. Jack Watson, Jimmy Carter's last White House chief of staff, says serving the president is almost like being in a magnetic force field. There's this gravitational pull to protect the president at any cost. Andy Card, George W. Bush's White House chief of staff, once told me, "Chris, if anybody tells you they're leaving the White House voluntarily, they're probably lying to you." So, a word or two about Kamala Harris. Could she have won the 2024 election? Or was it mission impossible? Within 48 hours of getting the fateful phone call from Joe Biden on July 21, Harris and her team, working their cell phones and laptops, had seized the nomination. It was a political tour de force. Within weeks, her approval rating spiked by 16 points. She went on to electrify a united Democratic convention in Chicago, of all places. But then the wheels began to come off. Harris seemed to lose her footing and ducked interviews at a critical stretch of the race. And then the Trump campaign launched a devastating television ad about taxpayer-funded transgender surgery. You may have seen that one. Against the advice of many Democratic operatives, Harris failed to answer it. It reminded a lot of people of John Kerry in 2004 when the Republicans, actually Chris LaCivita, Susie Wiles' co-chair, was the guy behind it. They launched a campaign called Swift Boat Veterans for Truth. Kerry's campaign was out of money at the time. It was a devastating ad campaign, and they never answered it. Some people think that's why he lost the race. In fairness, Harris faced a Herculean challenge. She had to be the change candidate in a change election while serving as the sitting vice president. Not easy. That's why the turning point of the campaign, in my view, was her appearance on the ABC program The View. She'd been prepared 7 ways to Sunday for the question everyone knew was coming. Would you have done something differently from Joe Biden? When that softball came over the plate, Harris whiffed. There's not a thing that comes to mind, she said. It was, in retrospect, the beginning of the end for her campaign. So why did Donald Trump win? A convicted felon 34 times over, leader of a bloody attempted insurrection at the Capitol, bungler of a once-in-a-century pandemic, the man who lost more jobs than any president since Herbert Hoover. By the way, isn't the amnesia about Trump's first term unbelievable? Somehow, despite all this, 77 million Americans decided Trump should be returned to power for another try. And here we are. There were many reasons Trump won. He took advantage of a worldwide populist wave that had swept incumbents out of office since the onset of 2020. Since the onset of COVID in 2020, I should say. He has, without a doubt, we now know, an almost feral reptilian instinct for campaigning. And for once, he had a competent campaign manager in a woman named Susie Wiles. Fate also played a part. Trump's defiant survival of an attempted assassination created a devastating contrast with Biden and Harris of strength versus weakness, fairly or not. And of course, Biden's last-minute abdication left Harris essentially with mission impossible, a shortened runway of just 107 days to introduce herself to the American people. Which brings me back to these last 120 days. What are we to make of Trump's second term as president so far? Well, without a doubt, the damage is real. People have been shipped overseas in the dead of night without due process. Revenge and retribution against political enemies has become a priority. The most draconian tariffs since the 1930s nearly drove the world economy off the cliff. The least qualified cabinet in history, assisted by partisan apparatchiks, is running amok. Experienced, sometimes essential public servants are being fired by the thousands. Blatant corruption is the coin of the realm, flaunted in broad daylight. It all began with Elon Musk taking a chainsaw to an agency that fed starving people around the world. To quote Bill Gates, "The picture of the world's richest man killing the world's poorest children is not a pretty one." Someone asked me recently, is there no one in this administration who has a heart? It's a good question. Sometimes it does seem as though cruelty is the point. But my wife says, believe it or not, I always see the glass as half full. So let me sound a more hopeful, optimistic note. There's a myth out there that Donald Trump is much more dangerous this time around because he's learned to work the levers of power. He had an army of loyalists, it was said, those Project 2025 folks, with a master plan. And they've cracked the code of governance. They're like velociraptors who have learned how to turn the doorknobs. Luckily, this is nonsense. The hallmark of Trumpism remains its stunning incompetence. 80% of the doors I referred to that he's tried to open have been slammed shut by the courts. Many, if not all, guardrails are still holding. While some universities have succumbed to intimidation, others are fighting back. For every supine university like Columbia, there's a Harvard. For every cowardly law firm like Paul Weiss, there's a lawyer like Mark Elias or Norm Eisen. In the long run, Shock and awe, so-called, is not a formula for effective governance. Trump's version of it has been less harmful than it might have been, I think. Dashing off executive orders is not the same as legislating lasting change, for better or worse. 8 years ago in The Gatekeepers, I wrote about the importance to the presidency of having an empowered White House chief of staff to execute the president's agenda. There would have been no Reagan revolution, I argued, without James A. Baker III. Reagan, an outsider president, knew he needed a consummate insider to show him how to get things done. Trump still doesn't understand this. He doesn't know the difference between campaigning and governing. Ken Duberstein, Reagan's final chief of staff, once told me that, in campaigning, you try to destroy your opponent. Governing, you try to make friends with him. It's something that Trump still hasn't figured out. He's too old to learn, and of course, he has no Jim Baker. Finally, but I welcome questions about Susie Wiles, who's a fascinating character. We can talk more about if you like. Finally, before I throw this open to questions, as I said before, Kamala Harris lost the 2024 election largely for one reason. Fairly or not, she was seen as representing the status quo. But if there's one thing you can be sure of about 2028, the next Democratic nominee, whoever that may be, will be the change candidate. Thanks for listening. And now let the questions begin.
Thank you so much, Chris. That was so enlightening and so great to have a back view of what was happening. So we're really excited.
Sure.
This is one of the highlight parts of this whole piece, is the opportunity to ask you some questions directly.
Looking forward to it.
We have a microphone right here, and I'm hoping some people will. Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, don't be shy, please.
So it seems like my the algorithm for the week for me has been Jake Tapper. I've heard him 12 times.
I've heard the name.
Yes, of course. But what nobody's really mentioned, and I'm just so shocked and depressed about, is Jill Biden, being that Jill Biden and Hunter Biden were that was the inner circle. And the fact that Jill didn't pull him out so much earlier, it just gives me an opposite impression of what I had of her beforehand. Is that how you feel too?
Yeah, I actually have a different take on Jill Biden. I think Jill Biden, as you know, back in the day, once upon a time, was a reluctant political spouse. She really had to be kind of dragged into it. There is a school of thought which Tapper clearly shares, which is that she's a kind of Lady Macbeth character, that she had become so accustomed to the trappings of power and all the rest that she was pushing Joe to stay in. I don't think so. I think that, look, the Biden people would tell you, Ron Klain would tell you that the thing that Jill was his most trusted advisor. There's no question about that. But I don't think she was Nancy Reagan or even Hillary Clinton, for that matter, in terms of her power and influence. And I think, frankly, I give a spouse a little bit of slack. I think a spouse obviously wants to be supportive of her husband, and if Joe wants to go, it doesn't surprise me that she was all in. So I think history comes down much harder on the aides who were paid the big bucks to be clear-eyed and supposedly sit the president down and tell him what he didn't want to hear, who failed to do so.
And I'm just surprised Jill Biden wasn't in that group. That's all. I mean, I'm just shocked.
Yeah.
Anyway, thank you.
Sure.
So if you were the campaign manager for whoever the Democrats select in 2028, on the basis of what you learned, what would you suggest? And then just a comment, it seems to me that the Democrats put too much emphasis on 10-point programs and not connecting with people. And how do you do that other than finding the right person with the charisma?
Well, I don't pretend to be an expert on or to have any crystal ball about handicapping uh, the next Democratic nominee. But I do think that a couple of things. Number one, I think the Democratic Party needs to fess up and own what just happened, namely its failure, not just Joe Biden's failure or his advisors, but the failure of the Democratic Party to prevent this tragedy, this 11th hour abdication by Biden that left Kamala Harris with no real chance to win. I think it's a scandal. I think they need to own it. I think Biden, whoever's advising Biden is doing him no favors because they should be telling him, look, boss, you got to own this, because nobody's going to listen to Joe Biden until he does. So I think the next Democratic leader, whoever emerges, has to, I think, will in all likelihood be someone who is an outsider, not connected in any way to that Biden Democratic machine. There's a reason why AOC and Bernie are resonating. Partly it's their message, which is very appealing and simple, but partly also is they're not part of that crowd. But I think I don't know if you heard Rahm Emanuel. I think it was last week. He was on one of the podcasts, and I thought he made a lot of sense. It's got to be really simple. The American dream is dead for the middle class of this country. Trump performed a bait and switch. He's taking money out of your pocket and giving it to billionaires. I'm paraphrasing. Rahm put it better than I do. And, they've got to just hammer that home.
Yep. Hey, Chris. Good to see you. I was going to ask kind of the same question. It seemed that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders were the most prominent Democratic people who are outspoken right now. But I'd like to shift a little bit and ask, what do you think of, if you think damage is being done by Elon Musk that will maybe help the Democrats?
Yeah. Oh, I think he's the gift that keeps on giving to the Democrats. Absolutely. I don't think there's any question about it. I mean, you couldn't, government for billionaires by billionaires is personified by Musk. And I think that, if he's being phased out, it's a little late for that, but it's smart to try to get him out of there. So yeah, I think that's a huge plus. And I can tell you that I mentioned Susie Wiles, the White House Chief of Staff. I talked to her from time to time, and she did tell me that she sat Musk down right after he eviscerated USAID, and he said, look, these people are providing vaccines to children in Africa. Really? And anyway, she tried to rein him in without much success.
Yeah. And if I could sneak in another tiny question, I was very surprised at this recent crypto donor, or not donors, but whatever you would call these people putting money directly into Trump's pocket, how he can get away with things like that.
I don't know. Was anybody else surprised? No, so it's just all out in the open. It's just there's Trump 2.0 is in some ways the same as Trump 1.0 in that he's learned nothing about how to govern. And that's the good news if you oppose him. But the bad news is that he's concluded, in part because the Supreme Court has given him a get-out-of-jail-free card for almost anything he does as president, he's concluded that, why am I going to hide anything this time around? Whether it's a $500 billion 747 from Qatar, or whether it's having a bunch of crypto guys over and rewarding them for investing in the Trump family. So it doesn't surprise me.
Okay, thank you.
Sadly.
Any idea if the Democratic old guard, any rumors that they're going to step aside at the election? Campaigning is probably only a year and a half, 2 years away. and AOC on one side, who I don't think could win because she's probably too radical for too many people. But not that I wouldn't vote for her, but any rumors, anything that the old guard, or do you think the old guard should step away? Um, they put their own candidate in, and I went to Bernie Sanders rally in Florida, and he had that same energy that Obama had, and it was amazing that they didn't let him step in.
So look, I mean, the old guard in the form of Biden is going away. That the whole Biden gang is going away. As far as Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries, I don't think they're going anywhere soon. But I'm not sure they're the issue at this point. I mean, I think what needs to happen is somebody needs to emerge. First of all, Democrats need to have a really strong midterm performance, and then somebody's going to emerge at some point. I mean, at this point, nobody had ever heard of Barack Obama at this point in that election cycle. Somebody's likely to emerge, but my sense is it's got to be somebody who is a kind of outsider, who's ready to be to just call it absolutely clearly that the system is rigged, the American dream is dead. Yeah, we get it. We understand what happened in 2024. Trump fooled you. He did a bait and switch. Here's what we're going to do. I think they got to keep it simple.
Just one little technical question. Under the Biden administration, the Trump tax cuts were in effect the whole time, and we had a soaring economy. And so Trump wants to keep the tax cuts in. It looks like they're probably going to do it. What's wrong with that?
Well, I think the tax cuts are going to be a huge gift to the Democrats, because it's just highway robbery. I mean, it's just taking, among other things, $500 million or more out of the pockets of people who can't afford health insurance or to feed themselves, and putting it directly into the pockets of people who make $500,000 or more a year, just for openers, and it runs the deficit up into the trillions. It'll be a gift for the Democrats.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm trying to figure out how to say all this. So I think the biggest issue at the moment is about the three branches of government and what's going on with the legislative branch and the judicial branch. And the legislative branch's attempt to say that there shouldn't even be a contempt of court thing against the executives, and the difficulty that the judicial branch is having in figuring out penalties and what to do when he's just running amok. So what do you feel about all that?
Look, it's a real problem. I mean, Trump's tendency to just thumb his nose at any kind of authority that tells him what he can't do. It's a problem, as you know. And look, I will tell you this just for what it's worth. What Susie Wiles told me about this during one of the first conversations I had with her after she was appointed White House chief, I said to her just flat out, is Trump going to obey the courts? And she paused, and she said, yes. But we're going to win more of these battles in the Supreme Court than a lot of people think. Well, clearly, they've won a very big one in the form of the Supreme Court's insane immunity decision, in my view, insane. But I'm not as pessimistic as some people about the courts in general and the Supreme Court in particular. I think there's going to be real pushback, and there always has been. Already has been, as I mentioned. I mean, a lot of the things. Look, it took about 3 seconds for a judge to tell Trump, no, Harvard, you can't tell Harvard they can't accept foreign students. Took actually about an hour and a half. But anyway, I think there's going to be. I think the guardrails are not. They're frayed for sure. But I don't think they're entirely broken.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Your wife is right. You really do see.
I'm Pollyanna, or glass half full.
I'm glad. This is more of a technical question. Millions of Democrats did not vote in 2024.
Yeah.
And the question is, beyond Harris's failure and the Democrats' failure, were there efforts that the Republicans implemented that held the vote down in places that you know about? And did they use tactics, techniques that concern you looking ahead?
Well, look, I'm not an expert on gerrymandering or you know or cheating in campaign voter registration. There have been efforts to suppress the Democratic vote for sure. But no, I think the major factor in 2024 was apathy on the part of Democrats.
But shutting down voting polling stations in the future, which they have been doing, will they continue to do, that to you is something that a good campaigner could override?
Well, I think the Democratic Party has battalions of lawyers who including Bob Bauer, the president's attorney, who've been fighting this tooth and nail. So they do their best. Okay. But again, I don't think it was decisive in 2024.
Good. Thank you.
Yeah,
appreciate it.
To me, as a retired physician, the biggest threat to all of us, rich, poor, well-off or not, is the wreckage of three what I consider to be hallowed institutions: the NIH, the CDC, the FDA. Even if in 2 years the Congress flips, or in 4 years we have a Democrat, how is the loss of talent and funding, the damage that has done for that benefits all of us, in healthcare, research? How is that repaired? It's ruined.
Well, you may know more about this than I do, but I would say you're absolutely right that, again, there's been the wholesale firing of thousands of civil servants and the hollowing out of NIH, and it clearly is damaging. Clearly, there's a brain drain that can't be corrected overnight. It might take a generation to repair. So again, I don't mean to suggest that real damage hasn't been done, and it's certainly been done in those agencies.
So I'm going to ask you to speak about campaign operatives, and just a few things I'll just throw out there. I heard somebody say on a podcast this week, referring to the Democratic operatives as all the teacher's pet, front of the class, really smart kids, while all the Republicans have all the back of the class troublemaker kids. Those are their operatives. I've always felt that if it was baseball, that the Democrats should go out and try and hire Karl Rove as a free agent to run their campaign. Yeah. And then I also want to hear you talk more about Susie Wiles. And does she really believe in Trump and all he's doing? Because it seems like you know her pretty well. Yeah. Thank you.
So to the notion that only the Republicans have the kids who sit in who misbehave and cheat and try to cut corners, I have one name for you: Rahm Emanuel. I think the Democrats have got plenty of tough operatives, including Rahm. And I would also say that, a lot of the Republicans that you think of, when you think of Trump and his campaigns, what a rogues gallery, right? I mean, from Corey Lewandowski to Paul Manafort and Paul Manafort was a funny story, maybe not so funny story in my book. I was talking to just briefly tell you the story of how I stumbled across him. I was interviewing a guy for my other book on presidential campaigns who was an obscure Republican operative, and he's telling me Reagan stories. And then one day he says, "Hey, Chris, did I tell you I'm staying at Paul Manafort's house?" I said, "No, you didn't." He said, well, maybe he'll join us on the next Zoom. I said, okay. And that's how Manafort suddenly became one of my best sources on the Trump campaign. We talked weekly. But so the Republicans don't have a monopoly on those people. But I would suggest that Susie Wiles was actually one of those front row students who probably had her hand in the air quite a bit. So the difference between this campaign, the 2024 campaign, and 2016 and 2020 in Trump's case, was that he really had two very smart, savvy, by the book, not necessarily by the book, but very stable co-chairs in Susie Wiles and Chris LaCivita. Susie Wiles, you asked me about. I think Donald Trump would not be president if not for Wiles. And I think she brought a kind of stability to that campaign that he'd never had. You may recall that he went through campaign managers like the Borgias went through family. One after the other, fired or whatever. She lasted. She has some kind of magic with Trump. I think part of it is that she grew up as Pat Summerall's daughter, the famous sportscaster. Summerall was an alcoholic, and she organized interventions with him. She'd be the first to tell you that she knows something about dealing with difficult men. That was part of it. The other part was that she and Trump had a shared contempt for Ron DeSantis. She made DeSantis governor. She ran his campaign. DeSantis then turned on her inexplicably. Nobody really knows why. But tried to destroy her career. Along came Trump. He rescued her. I think, and vice versa. I think that she really ran such a good campaign that Trump is where he is now. So anyway, yes.
We've talked a little bit about Democrats' economic policy strategy next year and in 2028. I'm curious about how they should grapple with the social legacy that they have tried to push over the past 10 years or so.
And tell me what you mean exactly by the social legacy.
Sure. I suppose the resurgence of identity politics.
Yeah. I think there really is a school of thought that they need to distance themselves from that. I think again, whether you want to call it woke politics or identity politics, I know they're different. But I think there's no question about it that the whole transgender issue really seriously damaged Kamala. Part of it was the fact that she didn't fight back. She didn't answer that devastating ad that was run over and over and over again. But look, I do think that hurt Democrats with independent voters, and particularly, with some of the young male voters, voters of color, young men of color, and I think that it's probably, it wouldn't shock me at all to see. I mean, to some extent, some people suspect that's what Gavin Newsom is already starting to do. That there may be a kind of a sister soldier moment for whoever the next Democratic nominee is to oppose the left, the progressives, on some issue or other in order to strike that middle course the way Bill Clinton did. So, but again, this is all speculative on my part. Yeah.
Why did Paul Manafort talk to you on the record?
You got me. Okay. I know. Look, I think this is a guy who came out of prison. He spent 2 years again, talking about a rogues gallery, he was the biggest rogue of all. Yeah. This was a guy who was a walking advertisement for, corrupt lobbying with dictators and oligarchs on speed dial, who was accused of being a national security threat. He shared private polling data with a Russian agent. The list goes on, and yet I think it's pretty simple. was ego. There he was, pardoned by Trump, out of prison after all he'd been through, and back in the saddle. And when I started talking to him on Zoom, he looked like he was on top of the world and happy to be back.
Thank you.
I just want to start with a comment and then followed by two questions. I'm a physician, and I had the observation in Biden's first term that he had early Parkinson's and early dementia. It was quite obvious to me. I've seen thousands of patients, and I told a lot of my friends about that. And my theory on this is that when he was in his basement and had received the vaccine, which is really not a vaccine, it was a worldwide biological experiment with an mRNA vaccination. And it's well known that this type of vaccine can cause, when you get the virus itself, you get vaccine-induced inflammatory response. And it's also well documented in the literature that after COVID, especially older patients, can get Alzheimer's-like symptoms. So I think that's why he actually had this big downfall, because it was related to the COVID. My question is, as a president, we have a minimum age. Should we have a maximum age? And should we also be having physicians look at the competency of someone once they reach a certain age?
Yeah, no, it's an interesting comment and a good question. And I can't dispute, I can't say you're wrong about your theory that this had to do with the vaccine and COVID and maybe
absolutely. I would bet my $10,000 on it.
And maybe triggering some kind of dementia.
Yeah.
Can I ask you what you thought 12 minutes into that debate, or even earlier, when Biden suddenly looked as though he had no idea where he was and said, in answer to an unrelated question, we finally beat Medicare? What did you think was going on?
He's demented. He's got early dementia. It's really quite simple. He's got early Parkinson's and early dementia. And I feel sorry for him, but it was basically because he was surrounded by people that did, as they say, you have to take the keys away from grandpa.
Yeah.
And no one took the keys away.
No, it's absolutely true. And look, 77% of the American people thought that from afar, that Biden was too old to run for re-election. Forgive me, let me ask you one more question.
It's actually not, I don't think it's ages. You can be 80 or 90 years old and be very physically, mentally. So it's not just age. It's with age comes, infirmities.
But does it, given your theory about Biden having some form of dementia, how would you explain the fact that he appeared to be governing competently behind closed doors and the examples that I gave you?
I can't comment that because I don't know what he was like when he's without a teleprompter. But
I'm telling you this.
But people can have.
No, but I'm telling you this was without a teleprompter.
But I think people can have moments of lucidity while they have dementia and cognitive decline. They can be, they can wax and wane. It's not just all one thing.
Yeah.
And then my other question is that, we basically, the American population had a choice between a sociopathic narcissist and an elderly demented guy with early Parkinson's. And
according to your theory,
yeah, according to my theory, and doesn't this bode that we need a third party? Because basically, you had a false choice. There's no choice. I think both parties were corrupt, and it's and here we stand.
Yeah.
That's what we get. And I think that most people, 77 million, whatever you said, they voted for what they thought was the lesser of two evils.
Yeah, no, I think that's true. I'm not sure what the fix is. I'm not sure there's an easy fix. And I think that, look, you could establish a minimum age or a maximum age for someone to be in that office. You could require that the White House physician testify under oath periodically about, you could require neurological exams and then have the White House physician testify under oath. That sounds like a good idea, but pretty recently, the Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, sat there before a congressional committee and lied. So, I'm not sure there's an easy fix here. And there's another thing that's just sort of fundamental to the way our system operates, the democratic system, and that is the power of incumbency is just overwhelming. Dean Phillips was the only one who had the guts to stand up and challenge Biden in the primaries. But as one person put it to me, somebody who was concerned about Biden, a Democrat who was concerned about Biden running, she said, look, it's pretty tough to challenge an incumbent president with a track record like Joe Biden's and no proof of what you're suggesting. No proof. I'll be the first to salute anybody who produces a failed neurological exam that we don't know about or a Parkinson's diagnosis that was deep sixed. But there's no evidence of that. None. Zero. Except observation. You can observe all you want, but there's no evidence.
He stumbled so many times going up Air Force One and riding his bicycle. It's pretty obvious. And
well, it's obvious to you, but again, there's no hard evidence.
Yeah.
That's the bottom line.
And I'll end up saying that he didn't run for president. He shuffled for president.
Thank you for this evening's presentation.
Sure.
As a published author, have you spoken to folks in the publishing industry? Have there been threats by the current administration to publishers not to publish types of books? And if so, do they have a game plan for when they are confronted with these threats?
No, that's a good question. It's a great question for my boss, Lisa Sharkey. Wish she were here to answer it. I'm not aware of any of those threats personally to publishers. But look, we've all seen what happened with ABC News and George Stephanopoulos. They caved, and ABC settled that suit, which they should have fought. And they probably would have won, even though Stephanopoulos was a little bit sloppy in that case. 60 Minutes has been fighting the good fight. I don't know what's going to happen there. There are rumors that, the management wants to apologize for a segment that, again, in my view, was perfectly, defensible. But I'm just not aware of any in the publishing industry.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Yeah.
Chris, could I just jump in for a second?
Yeah.
We want to make sure that you have time to sign some books, so
Yeah.
we'll have the 3 people in line will be the last questions that'll get asked. So thank you.
Good evening. Thank you so much for a great talk. It's really interesting.
Sure.
One of the couple questions I had was, I felt all along that one of the biggest issues in the Biden administration was the lack of communication. I felt like when I watched in my lifetime, and I'm retired now, in the 40 or more years, I've been watching presidential, information and elections and what they've been trying to do. I've seen almost every president try to get an infrastructure bill passed, for example, and none of them seemed to succeed despite the expertise they had and the bipartisan they said they had.
Yeah.
The biggest climate bill ever passed in the history of the world got through. That was near and dear to my heart. I'm an environmentalist, and I've worked also on USAID projects, so I'm also somebody who cares deeply about the social injustice and the environmental injustice. And then also the CHIPS Act he got through, which was unbelievable to bring in more manufacturing, and all of that was ramping up, and we were looking at really good numbers, employment records, all this stuff, but nobody was really putting that out. I felt like people I talked to who were on the fence about him, I said, do you know about this and this? And they didn't. And I said, I don't know what you think about that. And then my second question is, Project 2025, you say there's guardrails in. I'm seeing so much change, like the Schedule F changes where they're changing federal workers to civil workers so they can just get rid of them and put in Trump's choices in the head of the EPA or the head of, other organizations. And there's all kinds of things that are happening, these 100 or more organizations that worked for years to get all this far right-wing stuff in. And lastly, I wanted to say one more question was the gentleman who was speaking about Biden's incompetence. I thought that before he went on that stage he was in 12 different countries negotiating the ceasefire potentially over in Ukraine. So to me, if I was doing that, I'd be a mess to stand up in front of people and try to convince anybody. So
yeah. So let me to begin with the first part, and that is communicating his successes. I completely agree with you. I think this was the worst White House communications team in modern history. It had, and frankly, having dealt with them, I wrote a book about the first 2 years of the Biden White House, and I had pretty extraordinary access to Ron Klain, the White House chief, and others. But I got to tell you that White House in general was almost Nixonian in its contempt for the White House press corps, and I think that came back to bite them in the end. It was unnecessary, but it was the most battened down, buttoned up, scripted White House that I've ever dealt with, and it was inept at communicating Biden's successes. Build back better, and it was nonsensical. Most people couldn't understand what in the world that meant. And Bidenomics was a terrible way of trying to sell the fact that Biden created more jobs than any president in the first term in modern history, 17 million jobs, as you say. So, look, he had a great record in many ways.
We were the only developed country that didn't go into recession, right?
Yeah.
After the pandemic.
So he had a great record in many ways. No wonder Biden thought he could win re-election. But nobody, the message was not getting through. I completely agree. To your second point, I would just say about the damage that's been done. I can't argue with anything you said. I mean, there's been real damage. I just think that compared to Project 2025, has also been, just really inept in many ways, and much of what they've tried to do has been blocked by the courts. And so, again, as my wife says, I'm the glass half full guy on that. Did I miss one other question? I forget.
I think I had a third one, but I don't remember.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I have two related questions.
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about Biden's decline. Have you seen a decline in Trump mentally and physically? And the related question is, the related question is there anybody, Susie Wiles or the Treasury Secretary, who can talk Trump out of his worst instincts?
So, as for have I seen a decline in Trump, the bar is pretty low. You would admit.
Amen.
So decline, boy, that's hard to measure. As for, is there anybody who can tell Trump hard truths? There never has been. I mean, during his first term, he had one incompetent, inept White House chief after another, which was fine with Trump because Trump, I wrote about this in my book, The Gatekeepers. The most important duty of a White House chief of staff is to walk into the Oval Office, close the door, and tell the president what he doesn't want to hear. For Ronald Reagan, that guy was James A. Baker III. Baker, early on, Ronald Reagan wanted to go after Social Security. And Baker pulled together some allies, including Nancy Reagan, and he sat the president down and he said, Mr. President, Social Security is the third rail of American politics. You touch it, you'll be electrocuted. Let's focus on the tax cut. And Reagan pivoted, and the rest is history. As I say, there would have been no Reagan revolution without Baker. Susie Wiles, one of her first phone calls was to Jim Baker, who's now 96, I think, 95 or 96. And Baker told her what he tells every chief who calls him about this. Congratulations, you've got the worst blanking job in Washington. Multiply that by 50 with Donald Trump, because he will not be told what he doesn't want to hear. Long-winded answer to your question. Susie Wiles told me that I said to her, Susie, did it ever occur to you to say to the president, let's not do a blanket pardon of all these January 6th insurrectionists. Why don't we look at these cases individually? And she said, that's exactly what I told him. I said, what happened? She said, well, tie goes to the president. She lost that battle. She's losing a lot of battles. In my view, that's the most important job of any White House chief, and she's going to have to get a lot better at it if Trump wants to govern successfully.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I have two unrelated questions. My first is on the role of the courts. Given that, first of all, the ruling that Trump has immunity for anything he does that's presidential. And
almost anything.
Almost anything. And given the makeup of the court and what I deem the lack of enforcement power that the Supreme Court would have, I'm not sure I disagree with Susie Wiles saying that they're going to get more victories in the Supreme Court than we think. Yeah. But my question is how likely do you think it is, notwithstanding Susie Wiles telling you that the president will obey the courts, that he, in fact, if he gets a ruling he doesn't like, he will not obey it or dodge it, as some people say is happening at the present time? My second unrelated question is, do you think that in 2028 the Democrats can run a ticket of two straight white men, or do they have to have a woman or a black or a Hispanic or a gay on the ticket?
So to take the second question first, I think it's really unlikely that we're going to see a woman at the top of the ticket. I think given the...
I didn't say the top.
Well, but I think that's the only sort of safe prediction I feel like I can make. I think that's really unlikely, just given that experience of Hillary and Kamala Harris. But otherwise, no, I don't think there's going to be any litmus test. I don't think there's any bar to seeing a woman as vice president again, or a black vice president. No, I think, Wes Moore has been talked about as he's certainly vice presidential material at the least, and there are others as well. So, look,
do the Democrats have to put somebody like Wes Moore or Cory Booker or a woman on the ticket?
Well,
someplace, if not president, then vice president?
Well, I think it always helps to have a person of color on the ticket, because of the fact is that that's a huge constituency for the Democratic Party. There's no question about it. And the other question, I guess, was, what do I think Trump will do when push comes to shove with the Supreme Court? I have no idea. But I pass along what Susie Wiles said, just for whatever it may be worth. You can believe that she's lying or that she's naive. She may be one or the other, or she may be right. She's been wrong about some other things. So I'll leave you with this one thing that she told me, which is, I said to her, have you ever told the president maybe we should just cut out this revenge and retribution stuff and govern? And she said, yeah. I said, well, what did he say? He said he promised he would stop after 90 days. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.